Welcome to r/prorevenge, the movie, best of 2022 so far. In this extended episode, I'm going to be showing you some of the very best revenge stories from a variety of subreddits like prorevenge, nuclearrevenge, and even supernova revenge. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and let's get into it. Owners didn't want to give me what I deserved. Now they're about to lose a $3 million contract because I resigned. I am a young project manager for an unlimited commercial GC. I picked up a hammer for the first time 6 years ago, with no prior experience. I was raised believing if you work hard and apply yourself, you will be successful. For 2 years, I learned everything that I could in the construction industry. I took my work home with me and studied on my own time to better myself. For that, I was promoted to foreman. I was brought in to take over a small project at a 12-building, 120-unit condo complex. It started small, and the board of directors for the HOA told me they loved my professionalism, work ethic, and ability to complete projects on time and under budget. We won a big contract because of that small project. That was 3 years ago. I've since taken over the job of foreman, superintendent, and project manager. I do the billing, meetings with engineers and board members, scheduling, takeoff, material ordering. I even train the subs on application of new products because we didn't have enough mid-management. Now, the project just passed $2.7 million. We got a bid request for another $3 million job in the same complex. All the while, the board of directors are telling me how appreciative they are and how they've gone through 5 different contractors in the years before committing to my company because of my management and quality of work. This boosted my confidence, and I went to the owners asking for the raise they promised me 1 year ago for my production. They told me, "The experience you're gaining is far more valuable." I said, "You're right." So I put my resume on public, got contacted by a headhunter, and I just accepted an offer this week for an $80,000 a year salary, full benefits, 28 days PTO, including holidays, in the office now, no more working from the field in my own truck, laptop, Wi-Fi in my truck for on-the-go billing when I visit out-of-state projects, $80 per DM, 100% matching 401k for the first 3 years of my employment, and quarterly bonus programs. The company I'm with now only pays me $40,000, and that's it. None of the above listed benefits. The final nail in the coffin was when the owners bragged about how much my project made in a company meeting and then denied me a Christmas bonus. I laid this offer on their desk on Friday and watched their jaws hit the floor. I told the HOA board president of the project I'm running about my resignation when they couldn't match my offer. His eyes got big and requested a meeting with the owners, expressing serious concern about moving forward with the new project without my involvement. They don't have anyone to replace me, and I'm not gonna lie, it feels good to hurt their pockets when I gave them everything I had for 6 years and only asked for the median project manager salary. Screw those greedy buttholes. You know what, OP? Good on you. You're clearly not being valued by your own company, and at that point, when you put in such hard work for such a long period of time, it's been really successful and you've done really well for the company and you're just not getting rewarded. Yeah, in my opinion, it's time to move on, which is what you're doing. What's crazy to me is that even after showing the company the new contract that you're going to get and asking them if they can match it, they still didn't want to do that. Despite how successful you've been, how much business you've brought them, and how much business they might lose if you leave, they still weren't willing to double your wage. It's not as if it's loads of money as well. Like, as OP said, he's gone for the median salary there. He's not going crazy with it. 80k for somebody that's bringing in that much, revenue seems like a very, very fair offer. Hey, if you're not being valued, get out of there. Well done. Now for our second story of revenge. Wage theft revenge. I worked in maintenance for a religious organization that owned a large number of aged care facilities. Even though they were supposedly not-for-profit, they went all out to scam the government for as much money as they could. For example, I once saw a claim for wandering behavior in a bedridden resident so they could claim he had dementia, put him in a locked ward, and get extra money. I became aware that they were paying less than the minimum wage for many of the non-nursing staff. A high percentage of housekeeping were from overseas, and they told them they could just get away with it. In my country, you can claim back wages for 6 years, and it just so happened I was about to reach that mark, and I was thoroughly sick of their hypocrisy. I scheduled a meeting with the care manager and human resources. In the meeting, I requested to be paid the correct wage. After they realized I was not going to back down, they agreed to pay me correctly and would back pay me, but only if I didn't tell the other employees. I declined, and it ended up costing them over $700,000 to back pay everyone. I was recording the conversation and took them to Fair Work, an independent workplace ombudsman. Wow. They made everyone with the same job description as me redundant because they couldn't think of a way to legally fire me, and then outsourced maintenance, which ended up costing them much more. I took a nice holiday with the redundancy pay and informed on them with documented proof to the government aged care regulator for the fraud. They were inspected with a fine-tooth comb, and 2 of their flagship homes were put under 6 months constant government supervision. Always remember that wage theft is the largest crime wave in history. It is ongoing, and no one ever goes to jail for it. To be honest, this is probably an issue that isn't talked about as much as it definitely should be. But OP, the fact that you've been so selfless here, risking your entire back pay just so everyone else could also get theirs, is a brilliant thing. I mean, look, $700,000, it does sound a lot, but then in reality, it's what should have been paid to the workers anyway. It's not as if it's like a fine or they're losing that money, even though I guess they are, like they should have paid it in the first place. It's not theirs. It is pretty crazy and awful how companies like this do seem to get away with illegal practices such as this, underpaying their workers below the literal legal limit. It's just ridiculous. And yeah, OP's right. I guess people don't really go to jail. Why not? I don't know. Surely the manager or the owner of this company should, be put in prison for not even paying the minimum wage. I don't know. Punish him at least. Come on. And now moving on to our third pro-revenge story of this episode. The results of my yard work. First, let me say that I'm not 100% certain this is pro-revenge because I don't necessarily think of myself in that league. Well guys, I've scanned this story, and trust me, this is definitely pro-revenge. I live in a consolidated county. That means that the city and county governments merged some years back, ostensibly to reduce administrative and infrastructure costs. This is important because services like fire, police, utilities, and trash pickup are now managed by former county officials and not the city officials. Many of these services are also much more inefficient, and some services have been outsourced to private companies. My municipality outsourced trash and yard waste pickup a few years ago, and the 2 companies who now do those collections are woefully inadequate, and their services cost more than when the city or county did it. They both have similar sets of rules as to what can be put out for collection, take fewer types of waste away, and no longer come 2 days a week as the city once did, but now only come 1 day a week. We're all paying more money for less service. Now that the background is done, here's the story. I did some yard work over the course of a couple of weekends last summer, cutting some limbs, trimming some shrubbery, and cutting down a dead tree in my backyard. Knowing what the rules are for how much yard waste, limbs, leaves, and such can be put out, I bagged everything that was supposed to be bagged, filling up 3 of them. Things like leaves and small clippings, weeds, and such. The paper bags for yard waste from the big box home improvement stores are what they require, so I use those. I just fill them halfway up so as to not make them too heavy for the waste collectors, even though there are no written weight restrictions. However, if a bag is too full, they will knock it over to spill out the contents so they then don't have to pick it up. I cut the larger limbs down to under 4 feet in length, or they wouldn't be picked up. Anything at all they can do to get out of picking something up, they will do, and they almost always leave a horrendous mess behind when they do pick things up. The pile put out for collection is not allowed to be any wider than 10 feet, nor any deeper or higher than 5 feet, nor may it contain any piece longer than 4 feet. All bags must be placed in a row, no more than 3 feet away from the limb pile. My pile was maybe 4 inches longer than the 10 feet, and only because of the tiny ends of the limbs, smaller than a toothpick, hanging out of the pile. The pile was no higher than 3 feet, and no deeper than 4 feet. In other words, it fell within the size limits, except for a few twigs with leaves. I also had the 3 bags, each about half full of clippings and leaves, all lined up exactly as required and about 2 feet away from the main pile. They were scheduled to come on a Tuesday, but when I got home from work that afternoon, it was all still there. There was a pre-printed notice on my door that my pickup exceeded the prescribed size limits, and the note said that I'd be required to either pay a $250 oversized load fee or reduce the size of the pile by half to make it fit into the limits. This is where the revenge comes in. I had the next 2 days off, so the next morning, bright and early, I got out the hedge trimmers. I trimmed the ends of the pile back to exactly 9 feet in length. After carefully laying those trim bits on top of the pile, I went to the backyard, where the limbs I'd not trimmed up the week before were stacked for the following week's pile, and found 4 long, fairly straight limbs. I removed all the smaller limbs and leaves from these limbs, ending up with 4 moderately straight poles, each about 7 feet long. I marked 1 foot intervals on each pole in fluorescent orange paint and stuck them in the ground, out of the curb in the front yard, at the corners of a rectangle exactly 5 feet wide and 10 feet long. I got out the surveyor's tape, which is bright pink plastic tape used to mark property corners, and tied it onto and around the stakes at the height of 5 feet. This established a visual outline of the volume I was required to stay within. I made absolutely sure that everything in the pile was completely inside the poles and below 5 feet in height. This required adding almost 2/3 of the remaining pile in the backyard to the stack out front to bring it up to 4 feet 6 inches in width, 4 feet 6 inches in depth, and 9 feet 6 inches in length, with no pieces longer than 46 inches. The pile was almost twice as much material as before. This included some small logs, up to 4 inches in diameter, also each 46 inches long. The limit is 5 inches in diameter, all within the limits of the 5x5x10 the waste company mandates. I carried each of the 3 bags of clippings to the backyard and filled each of them up as much as possible while still being able to fold over the tops and staple shut each bag. I also included small 8-inch to 10-inch sections of the ends of larger limbs for added weight. The bags were now completely filled and weighed more than twice what they had before. I had to even use the hand truck to get them out to the curb, they were so heavy. Oh, and all the extra clippings I generated filled up 2 more bags, so the total was now 5 bags, the company limits. I then went inside, called the company, and very nicely asked that they come to pick up my yard waste since they hadn't done so on Tuesday. They agreed to send out a truck and crew and told me I would have to pay the fee. Come on then, I told them. They soon arrived and happened to be the same crew that normally comes to my neighborhood. I pulled a 25-foot Stanley tape measure from my pocket and asked them to measure the poles to confirm that the space was within the required limits. They did so and agreed the pile was not oversized and proceeded to spend the next 2 hours manually loading it all onto their truck. Oh, and it took both of them to manhandle each of those bags into the back of the truck too. I told them very nicely and with a smile that I knew what 10 feet was, pointed to the fence where it was marked with orange electrical tape, and thanked them for coming to pick up my yard waste. The 2 tired, sweaty waste disposal guys just groaned, got in their truck, and drove off. There was no extra fee added to my bill for that month. Never has been since. Now look, I know they got paid for their time, and I know that I had to do a lot of extra work on my day off, but since last July, I've not once ever had them leave so much as a single leaf on the ground in front of my house. They had to actually do some hard work, with me standing there in shorts, smiling, and drinking cold Gatorade while they were sweating. Wow, great story, OP, and I told you guys that was pro-revenge. There's nothing more infuriating than being set guidelines to stay within in order for something to happen. You stay within those guidelines, and then that thing doesn't happen, even though you've kept within the rules. Like, what's the point in having the guidelines in the first place? It doesn't make any sense to me. I think OP has shown that if you can be bothered to go to this extent, and, you know, really, like, just push the boundaries of what's reasonable. I mean, yeah, everything was within the set out guidelines, but it was pretty close. That was the entire point. And you can get some pretty good revenge. So you know what? Fair enough. Also, the beauty of this revenge story is the fact that nobody really got hurt too badly, did they? I mean, no one was physically hurt. They were paid for their overtime. But the message that it sent to them is pretty clear. The fact that in the future, since that moment, they've taken every single little bit of rubbish and garden waste that you've put out, which, by the way, I assume is still within the guidelines as it always has been, just shows that you got your point across. They listened. But yeah, the good thing is they got paid and, it was only a little bit of extra work for them. Methodical, meticulous, and well planned. OP, excellent stuff. Definitely pro-revenge. I knocked the divisional manager off his pedestal. I work for a large global IT company. In my team, we are part of a larger extended team and an even larger still divisional team. The manager of this division is called Raj. He's based in the States and is what many would call the poster boy definition of a corporate suck-up. According to him, he is in constant video chats with the CEO and has a lot of face-to-face interaction with him. He also appears on much of our division's promotional emails and photographic material, so he's a company-wide recognized person. As for me, I am a trench-working techie from Scotland. My direct manager is always happy with my performance, and I'm somewhat known in our extended team, but not so much in the divisional team. Until this event, which was a while before the COVID outbreak, although I was aware of Raj and his reputation, I'd never worked with him directly. I got invited to a company-wide collaboration event in America, which we usually use for technical training and innovation discussion. We got there, and there were some initial social events and meet and greets. Raj was amongst the group, and his general demeanor seemed appropriate for the reputation which followed him. We went into that first day bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I was assigned to a group of 10 people to work on a problem with some coding. All was going well until we came to do some group presentations. For our group, a young woman named Natalie was speaking for our results. It all seemed to go okay, but after the session was over, Raj asked to see Natalie out in the hall. From inside the room, we could hear Raj literally screaming at her. Many offensive slurs were used, and we could hear banging on the wall as well. Natalie returned to the room a sobbing mess, much to the shock of everyone. Raj returned as if nothing had happened. This pattern continued over the course of the week. Raj would single out people for these one-on-one performance critiques. He'd go into detail about how work was substandard and how they needed to improve, all while taking group photos for corporate comms for the higher-ups, orchestrating shots to make us all look like one big happy family. I spoke to some of my own team back home about this in my downtime, and it does turn out that this has always been rumored behavior for him. Just no one ever knew someone who'd experienced this before. I don't know what the job culture is like for this role in a place like America, but here we have dignity at work regulations. Performance criticism is fine, but not when you're engaging in ritualistic humiliation of your employees. I knew exactly what I was going to do. For the next few days, I made sure that I was delivering more presentations than anyone else and really making an effort to attract attention. As hoped, Raj asked me for a chat and pulled me into the hall. He didn't wait for the door to close before starting his rant. Experiencing it firsthand was interesting. He claimed I had no idea what I was talking about, even though it had likely been about 20 years since he did any technical work himself. He was vile, shouting and spitting in my face. I also learned what the banging noises were. He would punch doors and slam his hands on the wall near me as if to try and intimidate me. I was prepared mentally though, and just smiled and nodded during the entire rant. He looked angry that I was reacting this way, and by the end of it, I thought he was legitimately going to burst a blood vessel. When he finished, I asked him if he was done. He told me to get out of his sight, and that is when I did it. I gave him a Glasgow kiss. For those unfamiliar, that's a headbutt. And it's not the first headbutt I've delivered in my life, having been brought up near Glasgow. He collapsed to the floor in shock, holding his nose, which didn't bleed unfortunately, looking up at me. I leaned down, and in my most Glaswegian accent, I whispered to him, "If you ever disrespect me or my colleagues again, I'll kick the utter f*** out of you next time, you." I went back in the room, while he did not. Inevitably, I got the HR call. Raj was in the room as well, and I could see that he had 2 black eyes as a result of the headbutt. I was asked to explain myself, and I told the truth. Mostly. I explained about his abusive behavior, but focused specifically on the hand slamming and how it had been intimidating me. It hadn't really, but I massively played up on this aspect of the encounter. I described the headbutt as a reaction to when he slammed the wall right next to my head with his hands. I wasn't sure what story he told them, but I was sent away after this. I ultimately ended up with a disciplinary on my record, but no further consequences. Other team members were interviewed over the next few days, and once the pattern of abuse was established, Raj was terminated from the company. The most satisfying part of this was the day after, when everyone on the course went out for dinner, Natalie insisted that he stand next to her for the division group photograph. Black eyes and all. I have to think that that photograph contributed to his downfall in some way. You know, a lot of the time on this subreddit, we see really meticulous plans of revenge come together, formulated over years, thought out to every single detail, and it all ends up with one amazing payoff. And look, they're great, don't get me wrong, I love them. However, there is something so beautiful about just a headbutt. Simple as that. No subtlety behind it, no months or years of planning, just headbutting somebody for being a simple as that. It's brilliant to see. Raj fully deserved it. And look, if I could choose anyone in the world to give Raj a headbutt, it would be someone from Scotland. They are hard as fuck. Because look, normally what would happen in these sort of stories is OP may well have secretly recorded the interaction and got everyone else to secretly record and come together and gone to HR and gotten fired. And yeah, that would have been great. But sometimes people like this just need to be, I'm sorry, but headbutted. Like, simple as that. I don't think someone like Raj would learn from being fired. I think they actually needed this. And look, I'm not trying to advocate for physical assault, but in this story, a little bit of karma. I think it was justified. And what's amazing as well is that final photo as well. I mean, that's just so good. Him forcing everyone who's really unhappy to get in photos and act if they're having a great time just so that he can look good for corporate. And in reality, everyone's sad. And then at the end, him standing next to everyone who is finally happy with black eyes. Perfect. Now for our next story of revenge. I made my ex-boss lose $25,000 on his salary. I used to work at a Wendy's as a manager. It was a pretty trashy job, but my general manager was nice and most employees were easy to deal with. All this started when I was already working roughly 65 hours per week. I was offered a $100 bonus to work one of my only days off. I decided to do it, and later that week, before I'd even been paid, I was asked to come in again. I said this time I would like $150, as at this point I'd worked almost 23 days without any days off. They said they'd do it, so in I went. Cut forward 3 weeks. I've been asking about my money for a while now. I'm told by my general manager that I could speak to my district manager as he'd be in later that night. The conversation goes like this. Hey, do you know what's going on with my bonus? I'm owed $250 with both the day's work. Well, that's why I came here. You see, the store's been having trouble making money. Alright, so basically he's telling me that my performance isn't good enough. At this point, I'm working dinner rush, and the whole night is with me and 3 others, my girlfriend, best friends, and another friend that has grown close. Your shift just isn't making as much money as others, and your drive time is higher. Well look, we're doing all we can. It takes extra time when we only have half the number of people with the same amount of customers. That's really no excuse. Well, anyway, when am I going to receive my bonus? My district manager was a very sheepish man, a wuss. So he's very obviously scared when he tells me this. We cannot give you a bonus until the revenue rises and drive time goes down. I am speechless at this point. The rest of the conversation was a blur. I grew up on the south side. You don't mess with people's money. A day passes. I've had time to collect myself and speak to my entire crew. Everyone agrees to walk out with me. So I call my district manager. The phone starts to ring, but then it cuts off. He declined my call. So I called him again and again and again. Finally, I just leave him a voicemail. Look, Jacob, you need to talk to me. You have until 8:45 to call me back or all of night crew is done. At this point, it's 7:30. I go into my office and start watching my boss's email. She leaves it open and logged in, and I figured he'd probably email her before calling me. Around 20 minutes of watching this email, and boom, an email pops up. Emergency, Lonnie. This idiot put my name on the email, so of course I read it. Long story short, in the email, it was him trying to make sure my general manager was going to be ready to go to work. AKA, he wasn't going to call me or give me my money. So I get all my people together and we walk out, leaving everything out. All the meat, all the toppings, the fryer, everything. The next day, I turn in my keys. About a week later, I'm called by my brother. What's up, bro? My brother replies, Jacob lost all of his stores. He has to go back to Indiana. My brother worked at the store as well. If you don't know, district managers' pay is based on the amount of stores they have and how much they make. When Jacob moved back to Indiana, his wages got reduced from $65K to around $40K. All this for $250. So there you go. Just because Jacob wasn't willing to pay you $250, that by the way wasn't a bonus, that's just like what you worked for. A bonus is completely different, and I'm not entirely sure why it was phrased like that on the whole. That's just work. That's just a pay slip. You're owed that money, you did the work. There's no bonus about it. That's just what you're owed, right? But anyway, the fact that he couldn't give you $250 ends up costing him $25,000 per year. If that's not some good revenge and some good karma, I don't know what is. Look, I've said it before and I'll say it again. I will never understand treating employees badly. It just doesn't make sense to me, especially when they're doing such a good job. You can't employ someone for a shift and not pay them. That's illegal. You can't do that. You can't get away with that. And I'm sorry, but yeah, Jacob, you deserve this. I have to say as well, good on you, OP, and your team for doing a walkout, because it would have been easy to say, you know what, it sucks, but I want to keep my job. You guys took the hard route and you actually made a stand against this guy, and it was amazing to see. Good teamwork, bunch of legends. Screw the DM, screw Wendy's. That's what I say. Bag of nails. I am a dryliner, which means I do a lot of moving around for my trade, as most of the work I do is towards the end of most projects. This means that I spend a lot of my time renting flats and houses for only short periods, usually about 6 months at a time. This has meant that I've had to deal with a lot of landlords over the years, both good and bad. When it comes to the bad landlords, I'll normally just walk away and get on with moving to the next job and take the loss of my deposit and never use them again if I'm working in that area in the future. But this particular landlord got my back up so badly, I wasn't just going to just walk away. I'd managed to get myself onto a big job in London working on the new Wembley Stadium, so I decided I'd look for a house to rent rather than a flat, as I knew that I was going to be working on it for a while, so I found a reasonably priced, for London, house to rent from a private landlord in a local newspaper. I give him a call and meet with him later that day. He seemed okay. I went to view the house, paid him the deposit in cash, and moved in that weekend. For those of you that don't know, Wembley is one of the biggest stadiums in the world. It's got about 90,000 capacity, and it's very lovely. I ended staying in the house for nearly a year with no problems. I always had the rent paid into my landlord's account on time and fixed any small problems that might crop up with the house myself without bothering him. Up until the time when it came to moving out, I only ever spoke to him twice on the phone after there was an issue with the heating that I was unable to fix myself, and he sent an engineer around the next day to fix the boiler. Come the time that the job was finishing, I went round to the pawn shop that he owned to give him notice that I'd be moving out the following month and to let him know that I was happy for him to come round and inspect the house before I moved out, so that I could get my deposit back from him when I returned the keys. He never came round while I was in to inspect the house, so I assumed that he'd come round and let himself in while I was at work, as I told him that I had no issue with him doing that if needs be. So, on the day I moved out, I went around the shop and handed him his keys back and asked for my deposits. His response was, "What deposits?" The month's rent that I gave you in advance of moving in as a security deposit," I replied. He then told me he was keeping that to cover the cost of repairing damages caused while I was living in the property. I responded, "What damages?" With the bits of work and decorating I'd done on the house, it was in a better state now than when I'd moved in. His response was to step forward and get right up in my face and say, "You're not getting it back, so off." He then gave me a shove, which made me take 3 steps back to avoid falling on my butt. Now, I am what you would class as average size and build, and this landlord has a good 4 inches on me height-wise, and obviously has spent some time down the gym, and the wise move would have been to back away and cut my losses. However, before I was a builder, I was a member of the British Army in a regiment called the Royal Green Jackets, and they trained us that the best way to proceed when confronted with aggression is to meet it swiftly and with much more violent aggression. So, without even thinking about it, I started to move forward with the full intention of dropping this idiot quickly and painfully. But after the first step, a thought popped into my head like a bolt from the blue. So I stopped and took a moment to examine the idea from a few different angles and said, "Okay, bye," to my now ex-landlord walking out of his shop. What the landlord didn't know was that I had a spare backdoor key cut when I'd lived in the house, which I'd stashed in my van, in case I ever lost the keys so I could still get back in. So later that evening, I let myself back in and decided to stop for one last night before leaving in the morning for my next job, which was in Scotland. I spent the last night in the house, carefully removing every bit of wood in there. I took down doors, removed skirting boards, banisters, architrave, and floorboards, being extremely careful not to damage anything. I also completely dismantled all the kitchen units, took up the wood flooring and carpets. I then left everything in nice neat piles in each room. I got in my van the next morning and was preparing to start my drive when I decided I wanted to rub a little more salt into my ex-landlord's wounds. So I stopped at his shop on the way out of London, got a spare hammer, screwdriver, bag of nails and box of wood screws out of the back of my van and went into the shop. My ex-landlord was not there, probably for the best. So I left the tools with his confused looking assistant and told her to tell her boss, "You'll be needing these," and left for my drive north. I had my phone switched off while driving, and a few hours later, while I was having a bite to eat in a service station up by Nottingham, I decided to switch it back on, and was greeted by a string of text messages and some very colourful voice notes, which left me chuckling to myself. Oh, and by the way, I did reply to one of the texts that he sent me. The text was, "Do you think you're freaking funny, leaving me nails and screws?" I responded, "Yes." I tell you what, this revenge was pretty great, not gonna lie. I don't really think the landlord can do anything about this because you haven't damaged the property. Yeah, obviously what you've done is incredibly annoying, but you haven't necessarily damaged any of the individual components. You've just taken them apart. Extremely annoying, but is it damaging? I'm not sure. The only thing I can think of which would have made this revenge better, imagine this. You take off every single door from its hinges in that house and you just about with them and you change them all around, put different doors on different hinges, and then it would be like a puzzle for the landlord. He wouldn't know which door was in the right place. You know, some that wouldn't fit, perhaps they'd be different heights, who knows. Something like that. Instead of just removing everything, putting things back but in different places. Imagine different screws, the wrong screws in the wrong cabinet, for example. How annoying would that be? Some things you wouldn't even realize maybe for a number of years, or when new tenants came in. Great revenge, but I would have done that. A lot of effort, but definitely worth it getting shafted by someone like this. Now moving on to our second story of revenge. City tries to fine me for not mowing my lawn. So I threatened the city with a fine for not mowing theirs. The city would send me letters telling me my lawn was too tall, and that if I don't mow it, they'll send out a contractor to mow it at a price of something like $50 per square foot. So I stopped mowing their lawn. See, my property ended 15 feet before the curb. Not a 15-foot easement, it just ended there. My easement was 10 feet back from that, meaning 25 feet from the curb. So, after that portion of the lawn got too high, I copy-pasted their letter to me and certified mailed it back to the city. They also sent me a letter saying I needed to mow it at about the same time. I looked up my plat in the county records and referenced it back to them. I took pictures with a tape measure and reiterated that if they don't take action soon, I'm going to hire a contractor to mow it and charge them the same absurd rate that they were going to charge me. About a week later, I come home from work and it's been mowed. No bill, just mowed. So I continued not mowing that 15 by 50 foot strip of grass for the next 5 or so years I lived there. I'd even hired a kid to mow for me as I'd gotten too busy. And very specifically, I told him not to mow that strip. Wow, you just kept making the city mow that tiny strip. Really is great. Now, those of you that watch my channel regularly may have seen another of my videos very recently with a very similar story to this one. I just don't get why the city would even care. I imagine that OP had been mowing this part of the lawn for however long they've been living there. And after getting that letter, yeah, you're just gonna stop, aren't you? Like, it's so pedantic and unnecessary. I don't see the point. And yeah, you're gonna fight fire with fire in this situation. It makes absolutely no sense for the city to send this letter. Now they're having to waste a lot of money mowing it themselves when you had somebody doing it for you. Ridiculous. It's so good as well that you now employ a kid to mow just a section of your lawn and not the whole thing, just because, you know, let's get on back on the city. It's very, very good and very unnecessary, but I absolutely love it. That's what revenge is all about. Now for our final revenge story. A co-worker calls me out for a small mistake, so I put her mistake on display. To start, this woman is great as a person. but as a co-worker, she is the worst. Let's call her Regina. When I started at this place a year ago, Regina was to train me on an aspect of our job. I had to ask her to slow down and repeat herself several times because nothing made sense. Keep in mind, I've worked in this industry for 8 years longer than her. My boss was able to explain it clearly in 5 minutes, and I've never had an issue. Shortly after starting, I noticed Regina would CC our boss on every email she sent me. Regina would email me several times a day, calling me out for problems she noticed. Always CCing our boss, but I was always in the right, and my boss would back me up. I emailed Regina, only Regina, and said I felt like she was trying to get me in trouble. I felt disrespected, and I was wondering what I could do to improve. She replied, CCing our boss again, telling me that if I felt that way, it was my own doing. Got it. My entire team works from home, so our boss has put people in charge of certain things so one person has control. One of my tasks is issuing documents for signature via the very popular system we all know. Basically, my team sends me an email that says, send these documents to X, Y, and Z, and I get to it. Good news, Regina only copies our boss on super important documents, which I understand. The other day, Regina sends me a request, and I failed to copy her when it was issued. Fixed in under a minute and it didn't cause any issue, but she still made a big deal about it over email and in our team meeting. The next request I get from her has, be sure to double check your work and all people are copied as detailed below. This annoys me. The funny thing was, she didn't even attach the documents that I needed to send, nor tell me where the docs were located for me to get them myself. I reply asking for the docs and she sends them, stating, these are the final approved versions, except they're wrong. First, we send PDFs, not Word docs. She sent me Word docs. Second, the formatting was atrocious. Signature blocks cover 4 pages when they should just be on 1. The vendor name and address were put into different tables, so it made no sense. So I sent it as is. Of course, my boss is copied on this and actually has to sign this doc, and she is not happy with the state of this document. I replied to my boss with the email from Regina saying that this doc was approved by our boss, and with my other projects, I didn't QC like I normally do, which isn't expected of me, but I do normally to prevent issues down the road. My boss replies to Regina and CCs me laying into her. The OP, me, is not to fix her mistakes, as he's got his own job to do. This was also reiterated in our next team meeting, and I could see how angry my boss was. She and I had a one-on-one and she said that she was not upset with me. The next request I got from Regina was incredibly detailed and had everything I needed in the right format. Yeah, I mean, this is just very, very snaky. People like this, tough. Just weirdly always trying to get under your skin, make you feel bad about yourself, and make themselves look good to their boss. The fact that you email Regina OP, just a flat out email asking a question, then they reply to you, CCing the boss. It's just so snaky. It's so obvious that they're trying to get you in trouble and trying to make sure that the boss knows that you've made a mistake. It's not teamwork. It's just very unnecessary. And yeah, as I say, it like goes against the whole idea of working in a team. It's just very, very, I don't know, snitchy, I guess. Horrible. And look, as you say, you normally would quality check, and I guess you kind of did quality check. You knew something was wrong. But anyway, you're not going to stick up for someone who's been going behind your back trying to get you punished, are you? When they do something wrong. And it's great the boss, the whole time, didn't even care what Regina was saying. They were like, yeah, I know you're doing a good job and I know you're in the right here. Just let Regina do her thing. Ultimately, it led to Regina getting, you know, punished herself. Good stuff. Very strange behavior from her. I don't know if she was trying to just get a promotion that maybe you both would have been going for, or just make herself look better than she was. It's very strange and it's very backwards. I don't like it at all, and I wouldn't employ someone that was acting like that, that's for sure. I love you, buds, but I'm cutting your throats. I am a millwright who specializes in rebuilding natural gas turbines. I run with a very top caliber crew where everyone has a role to fill. My role is overseeing anything that's lifted with a crane. My technical title is rigger. If a load falls, it's my fault. If someone gets hurt while I'm in control of a lift, it's my fault. If equipment is damaged while I'm in control of a lift, it's my fault. A millwright, by the way, is a skilled worker who works with industrial machinery. That means they'll work in factories, construction sites, anything like that. The incident in question happened about 2 years ago, but we'll need to go back a couple years further to get the backstory. I was a fresh member of the crew. and I demonstrated competency in rigging. So, after roughly 6 months with this group, my superintendent put me in charge of all rigging. Now look, I wasn't the fastest rigger, but I was safety focused and insisted on doing it right every time, even if it took a little longer. This meant that my superintendent didn't have to watch over every rigging task and could go and relax because I had it under control. Another millwright joined the crew about the same time I did. We will call him Larry. Now, we didn't get along at first, but after a few months, we became friends. Larry was the act now, think later type. Much like the superintendent I travel under, Larry was therefore prone to making mistakes because of that attitude, but he was a very fast worker and worked like a mule at all times, and I respected that. He wasn't especially skilled in any one area, so he had no special position. That meant sometimes he'd get put on less glamorous work, and I soon learned he was very jealous of my position as the rigger. At times, he would make comments like, "I'm gonna take your job." Not in getting me fired, but bumping me down a rung and him taking my spot as rigger. He'd come up behind me while I was looking over my checklist to point out something I may not have checked yet. If supervision was near, he'd make sure he was heard. At this point, I should mention this. I stick out like a sore thumb in this crew. I was raised in a very strict Christian cult, but in my mid-20s, I realized what was going on and left at great cost, losing my family and friends because of strict shunning rules the cult practices. Some of the stricter things stuck with me, like I've never been intoxicated, I don't use tobacco, no recreational drugs. I speak professionally, without slang or colloquialisms for the most part, but these traits are the ones that stick out from a crew of men that travel the road and work in harsh environments away from home for months on end. But Larry, he fits right in. Larry quickly became the superintendent's puppy, bringing him gifts of his favorite alcohol, staying out late after work with him, even rooming with him on the road. I, on the other hand, leave work, hit the gym, cook my food for the next day, and make sure I get at least 6 hours of sleep so I can perform the next day. I realized that that puts me at a disadvantage socially in the workplace, but I prefer to let my work speak for itself. Anyways, fast forward about 18 months. We're starting a project just before COVID hits. About 2 weeks into the job, I have to attend a mandatory class through my union. It's a 40-hour class and in a different state, so I'll be gone for pretty much an entire week with travel time. I get permission from supervision and leave, with Larry rigging in my absence. A few days later, I'm laying in bed stressing out about the final test I have to take the next morning. If the test isn't passed, the entire week is wasted. I always psych myself out before a test, but in reality, I don't have anything to worry about, as I'm a good student and I test well. My phone goes off, and it's a text from Larry. "I love you, bud, but I'm cutting your throat," it says. I reply, "What are you talking about? When you get back, I'll be the rigger. You can do the trash work from now on." I'm not proud of the response I came back with, but it's how I truly felt in the moment. Be careful about cutting the throat of someone smarter than you. Now, I'm far from the smartest person you'll ever meet, but I do enjoy reading, studying, and learning. And being smarter than Larry wasn't an accomplishment by any stretch of the imagination. The next morning, I passed the test and headed back to the job, where Larry had in fact usurped my position as rigger and was lording it over me as I went about doing the tasks that he would normally do. To be completely honest, it was kind of like a vacation at first. Getting paid nearly $40 an hour to clean parts or torque flanges with no stress? Yeah, sign me up. But I was upset. I was upset because I knew I did my job better than he would. I knew that he got along better with the superintendent because of their similar personalities, but I didn't feel that I should lose my position simply because Larry had more in common with our superintendent than I did. Regardless of that, I was now dealt these cards and I had to play them. Just 3 days after I got back from class though, the job was shut down. COVID-19 was just now sweeping the country. Out of an abundance of caution, the plant shut the project down until further notice. We were sent home for about 3 days and then called out to an emergency shutdown where a turbine had crashed. We roll out and are on the job 48 hours later in the middle of nowhere, Alabama. We get right to work. On this particular unit, you pull the entire roof off in 2 sections with a crane to open the enclosure. Compared to many things we lift in a project like this, the roof weighs very little. The turbine rotor may weigh over 100,000 pounds, but the roof usually weighs only about 7,000. lightweight. But it is large, and there are critical parts around the roof that can be damaged if not lifted correctly. Typical procedure is to be on top of the roof after it's unbolted, be in a full body harness and tied off to an approved anchor point capable of holding at least 5,000 pounds per OSHA regulations. We then slowly take the weight of the roof with the crane until it's floating, and then climb down off of it and continue the lifts until it's set on the ground or on a truck to be moved. The superintendent instructs me to go on the roof with Larry and assist him. Do whatever Larry tells you to do. Okay, boss. I put on my harness and climb to the top, beginning to assess the situation. The rigging to lift the roof is 4 5-ton chainfulls. It's capable of safely holding 20 tons, well over the weight of the roof. The crane is also well overrated for this lift, even with the boom extended all the way out in order to clear another building on the way to the ground. Larry has it all rigged up, but no tension on the wire rope slings. And then I notice his crucial mistake. He's forgotten to account for boom deflection. When a crane takes the weight of a load, the boom flexes down. Depending on the crane setup and the weight of the load, it can mean that while your crane hook might be centered in your load with no weight on the hook, once you get the weight of the load on the crane hook could be anywhere from a few inches to a number of feet off center, which means that when the load comes off the ground, it swings. Swinging is bad, always. An off-weight swinging could tip the crane, crash into equipment, crash into a person. It's very dangerous. At this point, I start calculating. Is this weight enough, even swinging, to tip this crane? No, not even close. Is it enough to break a chainful? No, not even close. Are there any people working around us that could get hurt? Nope, it's just us. Is there any equipment that could be damaged if it swings? Yes. An electrical control panel, which has all power killed to it and has been disconnected, is in the swing path. So, I decide to let Larry hang himself. He looks at me and asks what I think. I tell him, "This is your show, boss." He asks what I mean. I look him in the eye and draw my finger across my throat. He gets nervous because he knows exactly what I mean. He then starts double checking everything and still doesn't notice the boom deflection. After a couple minutes, he decides I must be talking out of my butt and proceeds with the lift. I stop him and remind him to tie off with his harness. He doesn't realize it, but we're about to go for a ride. Generally, when I'm rigging, I first find out what the thing I'm rigging to weighs. It's a vital piece of information. If I know what it weighs, I can have the crane operator track how much weight he has on the crane, and I'll be able to know when the object should start to pick up. If we get to over 10% more than the object should weigh, there may be something stopping it from moving, and we need to stop and reassess the situation. The rigging could fail. The object you're lifting could jump into the sky. All kinds of mayhem may ensue if a hidden bolt holding something together breaks because you used too much force to lift it. I asked Larry if he knows how much the roof weighs. He doesn't. I do, but I don't tell him. He starts signaling the crane to slowly hoist up. The operator complies and starts lifting. I'm watching the boom get pulled more and more off center. We're probably 2 feet from the center of the load at this point, meaning a swing that could travel nearly 4 feet. I stop Larry and ask him to see how much weight is on the crane. 11,000 pounds, 4,000 more than what it should weigh. This roof is a bind because we're not picking it straight up, but at an angle. It's either not going to move or we're about to fly. I brace myself, hoist up slowly. Larry calls over the radio. Boom! The whole roof shoots a good 2 feet into the air and swings wildly towards the control panel. Larry and I are riding it like pirates in the crow's nest in a hurricane. We crash into the control panel, bending it over at a 45-degree angle, destroying most of its components. People start pouring out of the nearby trailers to see what the commotion is all about. The crane operator is yelling over the radio, asking what the heck just happened. I'm smiling. Larry is shaking. He sees me smiling and knows that I knew. We get the roof set on the ground and are met by our superintendent. He's chewing Larry's butt hard, not literally, I hope. He gets to me and asks why I let it happen. And I just say, I just did what Larry told me to do. The superintendent is no dummy. He's seen a thing or two and knows exactly what went down. Larry is demoted and I'm reinstalled as rigger immediately. And a few shifts later, it is all smoothed over. Now, as I said, Larry and I are actually good friends now. We've been through a lot together and have each other's backs these days. He's now the foreman on our crew and lets me do my thing. Failing your way to the top is still a valid way of progressing in my field, but I'm happy for him. He's actually good at it. And I guess that's all there is to say about that. And there we go. That is the end of that one. Really enjoyed that revenge story. You know, it's great, right, isn't it? When you don't even have to do anything. OP hasn't necessarily even done anything, but by letting Larry just get on with what he wants to do, knowing he's gonna F up and just saying, yeah, man, you're the boss, go for it. It's almost as if he's just letting Larry cause his own downfall. It's very good to see. You know what? It's actually quite nice that we see that Larry isn't actually a terrible person, because I know people like this. I mean, I've been there myself. You think that everything's going well, you're doing an amazing job, maybe you get a little bit arrogant, a little bit cocky, and you think you're better than you really are. And sometimes it does take a reality check like this to realize, oh, I'm not as good as I thought I was. Maybe I need to listen to people who know more than me and are good at their jobs. But yeah, for OP, easy, got your job back, good mates with the bloke now. For Larry, probably trying a little bit too hard to get to the top, and it's not nice to push other people out your way, but hey, end of the day, he's doing his thing now as the foreman. OP's got their job back, it's all good. Rigging, by the way, sounds very challenging. I mean, I would be terrible at that, that's for sure. If I was rigging this joint, mate, I'd be in the sky and I wouldn't be coming back down anytime soon. But yeah, very calm, calculated revenge, which I do like. No malice in it, really. You actually clocked that no one was actually going to get hurt, really, as well. Just a bit of equipment damage. So you knew that it wasn't going to be that serious, but serious enough for you to probably get your job back. Yeah, very nice. Cool, calm, collected, chilled. I'll have my job back. Larry, sit down, but you're also not a bad bloke. Good stuff. You might even say, if you want to, that is, that OP rigged Larry's demotion. Now, here's the thing about that. That came to me and I thought, is it worth saying that? And I've decided it was. I've said it now, and I'm not going to cut it out. So let me know in the comments down below. Was that pun worth it? I doubt it. So I recently had a run-in with UPS. UPS smashed a nearly new MacBook that I sent with them. I asked them nicely to pay me back for it, and they asked about, blaming me, blaming my packaging, saying it was impossible they damaged it, etc. I was able to prove that my packaging was flawless and get a statement from the Apple shop that I took it to say it was damage caused by being dropped or thrown. I could also prove it worked when I sent it. They weren't interested and messed me about for weeks, sending me from pillar to post, even threatening to make me pay interest on customs charges, which I wasn't liable for, as the laptop was smashed on arrival and thus worthless at imports. I took it to small claims. They hired a lawyer who sent me letters saying they contested it and would go for full fees, etc. if I lost. I went for it anyway. I did law stuff university, so I knew the basics, and I thought my case was pretty clear cut. I won. I won my costs back, plus extra, plus interest. But they ignored the court order and didn't pay. Now, this laptop was originally being sent to my beloved mother-in-law. She asked me to help her with the problem, as UPS were also seriously harassing her for the customs fees. However, very unexpectedly, before I could resolve it, she passed away. It was the last thing she ever asked me to do for her. I love that woman more than pretty much any human on this planet. She was my mother, my best friend, and my mentor. Taking down UPS was now my personal vendetta. I researched my options. I could have taken the usual, more conservative legal route to reclaim my money, but no, screw them. I don't care about the money anymore. I want revenge. I want drama. I want karmic justice. I went to the High Court. I got a writ of control. I, of course, added on more fees and more interest. I then hired the most aggressive bailiff firm in London. I trusted that the trashy processes and attitude of UPS to mean that they would ignore the letters and actually get a visit. They did. The bailiffs rock up at UPS headquarters and explain the situation. UPS refused to pay, so the bailiffs start listing goods. Security try and make them leave. The office manager tries to bully them out, but obviously no poops are given by the bailiffs and they crack on with their jobs. I wasn't allowed the body cam footage, but they did send me a detailed report. The final conclusion is copied below. Calls were then made to the accounts manager, who arrived in a hurry. As no payment was forthcoming from them, the agent again explained the removal process and cost involved, and called the office for approval to begin removals. The agent began to seize assets. The finance director then arrived on the scene. He was not at all happy about the attendance, but ultimately agreed to pay a voluntary payment in full from his personal accounts in order to stop the removal. Look, I know it's a drop in the ocean to UPS, but I got more than double what I originally asked for to replace the laptop. They would have had to pay even more on top in fees to the bailiffs. I reckon it cost them at least 3 times more than the original claim in the end. But mostly, I just enjoy the mental image of the flustered finance director and his impotent rage, having to pay his own money to stop the heavies taking desktop computers and fancy pot plants and things like that out of their swanky head office lobby. You know what, OP? Good on you. I think that most people in this situation may well have just said, you know what? That's tough. It happens. What can I do about it? Some more, I don't know, brave people, I guess, might have gone down the route of going for something more logical and trying to get their money back, etc., etc. But when you've got this massive corporation saying, no, it was your fault, there really is a limit, in my head anyway, to what you could really do. But the fact that you went above and beyond and you didn't even care about the money anymore, you just wanted justice for your mum, amazing stuff. Well done. Hey, I tell you what, that body cam footage would have been unbelievable though. If you ever get your hands on that, not that you will, please put it on Reddit and tag me, because that would be amazing to watch. Imagine going in, bailiffs, into UPS main, HQ, and be like, you know what, we're doing this properly. We're taking you guys' stuff. You owe us money. Incredible. Good job. Stealing my girlfriend's Wi-Fi strained or ended their relationship. Some backstory. After my girlfriend moved to her new apartment, closer to both her sister and myself, she obviously wanted internet. Although she isn't fully tech savvy, she does know her basics, and thus explicitly asked the provider if she should be worried about admin kind of Wi-Fi protection. She was assured that it was all fully safe out of the box. No admin. In fact, just press a button to connect her laptop and her Wi-Fi network would be fully secured. The incidents. So a few months or years later, my girlfriend started to notice that her internet speed went down. This became very apparent while video chatting with some of her family members in Japan. Like I said, my girlfriend knows her basics, so she knew that it didn't have to be the internet connection itself. It could also be her laptop, or maybe the network cables had eroded due to age. She decided to cover as many options as possible before contacting her ISP support desk, so she asked me to help. I'm a geek, and I work within the field of ICT for over 30 years now, mostly as systems administrator, but also as IT manager or co-manager, during which I'd still try to keep tabs of my colleagues and even cover shifts if the need arose. So visiting my girlfriend and getting to show off my elite IT skills, perfect. It took me a moment, but I discovered the issue. Someone was leeching off her Wi-Fi. Technically, the ISP support staff were right. This wasn't an admin kind of thing anymore, it was completely randomized. Sort of. You see, on their routers, the Wi-Fi password was the same as the random SSID, aka network name. Like, what the F? I was quite angry at both this incompetence as well as the blatant disrespect for my girlfriend's privacy, maybe a bit too much. But yeah, sure, for some people this is only about getting internet, but what many people overlook is that such leechers also gain access to your private network. So basically, they could also access any public Windows or Mac shares you may have active, not to mention any other connected devices. Fortunately, my girlfriend knew her basics, as I mentioned earlier, but I was still angry. The revenge. So I suggested something I had done earlier. Let's replace this POS router for a professional device, in specific the same kind of ZYXEL router that I used at home, so that we could set up a secured VPN between ourselves and get some other nice feats as well, like a private VoIP connection. She agreed, so we bought her a new router together. We're talking professional gear here. These things cost about as much as a high-end smartphone, so obviously we were going to split the costs, considering that a mid-level could also have helped her out. Now, even though I consider her previous router a POS, I still have to admit that it did provide some very useful features, like a syslog service. It could also use USB storage. So I turned on Wi-Fi logging, plugged in a large USB memory stick, and then we waited for the new router to arrive. Then I got to work. First, I set up my girlfriend with a nice hidden Wi-Fi network so that no one could easily find it. Next, we set up a much better security scheme, and then it was time to get even with the lowlifes. I set up a second Wi-Fi network, which was completely the same as the previous one, but this time I throttled it down a bit so that it couldn't usurp the full bandwidth. Then I added some specific DNS overrides. DNS is a service on the internet which translates names into IP addresses, which is what your computer needs to connect to something. You may care about reddit.com, but all your PC cares about are the associated IP addresses. The thing is, this service can be easily overridden, and I studied the logs, so I knew exactly which sites the lowlives visited the most. So, from now on, going to banker.nl using this router would point your browser to a hardcore, not very legal, gay prawn website. Not very legal as in, the site didn't bother asking for consent first, but got you some close-up screenshots right away. Then it was time for bankb.nl. I redirected that one to a shady, hot scissors lesbian website. I also noticed that a certain webshop was sporadically used by the leechers, so I decided to redirect that one to a relationship counseling website. When you think your spouse is cheating on you, come to us. It was around that time when I noticed that my girlfriend's router was using a more modern firmware than I had on my router. This one also provided web redirection services. Companies can use this to redirect specific websites based on their URL to a local or more remote web page. So say you don't want your staff to use social media, then you could just tell the router to redirect, say facebook.com, to a local web page which explained the no social media allowed policy. Much to my delight, this service also supported a randomizer trigger. See, I still remembered a website from the early days of the internet. Something about a goat from Sweden, which was so horrible that it became a meme on its own. Seriously, a look at that picture could never be undone anymore. There's a reason I still remember the horror now, an easy 30 years later. So, I looked for and found a replacement and then happily added that to a randomized redirection service. So every once in a while, the leechers would open their favorite website, and no matter whatever kind of site they asked for, they'd always end up with something completely and utterly disgusting on their screen. Then we waited. I need to point out that my girlfriend didn't fully agree with some of my actions, especially when she learned of the aftermath. But we never had an argument over this because she could also understand my POV. Don't mess with my girlfriend. And she agrees that if you trespass, even in the digital world, then all bets are off and you lose your rights to a civil solution. Don't mess with a geek, okay? The aftermath. One day, my girlfriend got home from work and noticed a huge moving van outside. She gave it no further mind, but when she got to her front door, she noticed that her neighbor 2 doors over was moving out. She brought this up with her direct in-between neighbor a few days later, and as it turns out, things completely exploded over there. The shouting and accusations could even be heard through the walls. It seems the pair got into huge arguments about their rather explicit choice of websites, and once the deed was done, there was no room left for any kind of reasoning. One of the two even accused the other of hacking the internet, because it was only after the first fallout that those goating pictures started to show up. As far as we knew, they broke up. For the record, I regret nothing. You know what, that's actually pretty insane if you think about it. A couple leeching off your internet, you realize they're doing so, and you've inadvertently gone to the extent of destroying their relationship. It's incredible. Like, it really is good. Because you had no idea you were even doing it, really. Yes, you knew you were messing up their search and stuff like that, but you didn't know the inner working of their relationship, and you didn't realize how much conflict you were causing by doing this. It's really good. It's also very fair, because ultimately they are stealing from you, and, you know, they're making your life worse, and they're taking stuff from you without asking and without paying. That's very poor. The fact that they're moving out or divorcing or whatever, that's crazy. Just over the internet. Yeah, pretty crazy couple anyway. Well deserved. Now guys, before I go, just for me, don't look up that goat meme, because I've done a bit of research. Seriously, don't Don't look it up. If you know, you know. It's mental. Turnabout is always fair play. I'm not sure if this one belongs here, as I was not the one actually wronged. My revenge was taken for someone I've never met, and I honestly don't know if they personally got any satisfaction from it. I do know what it did to the perpetrator, and that it satisfied me, so I'll let you guys decide. Like many of my tales, this one takes place in the distant past, before cell phones were common, and before universal caller ID was the norm, in a time dinosaurs most likely roamed the earth. Well, the 80s at least. These things are very important to the story. Our tale takes place in a large West Coast city, known for a big orange bridge and delicious sourdough bread. I was living in the city for several months, working temporary duty for my company, and was preparing for work on the day in question. As was my custom, I was getting dressed, listening to the morning radio show on a local station. This station's jocks had started doing something called the Monday morning wake-up call, where, on the first day of the week, they would make a prank call on the air to a victim chosen from writing suggestions from the listening audience. Now, doing this was actually very controversial in radio circles at the time. I've been a radio DJ in my hometown for a few years, and there are rules you must follow. One of the biggest rules is that you can't make a false or deceptive radio transmission, like announcing an emergency, sending an SOS, or cry for help, or other such deceptions. Doing so is a federal offense. You can lose your license and be fined, or even do jail time. It's a big no-no. The debate has long since been decided, but at the time, doing prank calls on the air was a grey area. There were people who were sure it constituted a false transmission, and some stations refused to do it. The argument was still alive at the time this happened. This day happened to be Monday, and the intended victim had been nominated by her husband. They had experienced a power failure at home earlier in the week, and the husband's suggestion was that the station call his wife, claim to be from the utility, and tell her that the power outage was somehow their fault and they would have to pay for it. The station staff loved the idea, and they proceeded to call the wife at her place of employment, a local bank. The victim answered, and the prank began. "Hello, is this Mrs. Victim? I'm John Doe from Area Power Company. Do you remember having a power failure earlier this week? Well, it was due to a blown transformer on your block, and we've determined that the cause is a wiring fault in your house. We may have to cut off your power until you get it fixed. Also, you will be charged for the transformer. The total cost is X thousand dollars. Would you prefer we put that on your utility bill, or do you want to make other arrangements to pay?" As you might imagine, the woman was shocked, then scared. As she asked for more information, having trouble believing that they were going to have to pay thousands of dollars, she got increasingly more upset. This egged the radio staff on. The guy making the call kept increasing the pressure on her more and more, eventually telling her that her power would likely be cut off until payment was made, and that there might be a lawsuit. After several minutes, she suddenly hung up in tears. He called her back, and when she heard his voice, she hung up again, crying even harder. This time, the guy waited a minute and then called back again. Another lady then answered the phone, a co-worker, and he asked to speak to Mrs. Victim. When the co-worker asked his name, he replied, "This is her husband." The co-worker cursed at him, called him a liar, and hung up. The radio studio was filled with laughter. The jocks thought it was hilarious. They took calls from listeners who were all laughing and talking about what a great prank it was. They finally got the husband on the phone, and he was also laughing and joking that he'd surely be sleeping on the sofa tonight. He was congratulating the radio staff on the fine job they'd done, terrorizing his wife. The radio host promised the listening audience that, because the prank was so funny, they would certainly be playing the whole recorded prank again at noon. So, be sure to be listening, and call your friends. I, in my efficiency apartment listening to this, was getting mad. I was still pretty newly married, and I couldn't imagine doing something like that to my wife. All I could think of while the staff and listeners on the radio were laughing was that a few miles away, a young woman was in the ladies' room crying, probably with co-workers trying to calm her down. What made it worse to my mind was that the guy who set her up for this was the one guy in the world who should have had her back, her husband. Anger turned to resolve. Resolve formed a plan. I grabbed the city phone book. Remember, it's the 80s, and looked up 2 phone numbers. I called the first one. You may remember that I said I'd been a radio disc jockey myself. It was a tiny dawn-to-dusk station, but I knew how stations worked. I knew what they liked, and more to the point, I knew what they did not like. I'd also done a lot of voiceover work and could sound professional as heck. The phone rang and was answered. "You've reached Kyle, Radio Jerk." I launched my attack. I began in a professional voice. "Yes, this is George Smith." I picked a more believable name. "From the City Office of the Federal Communications Commission. I've been getting some disturbing calls about your morning radio show, and I need to speak to your program director to discuss it." The radio guy stammered. He's not, here right now. Let me get you someone else." I was put on hold, and after a few moments, "Hi, hello, this is Radio Guy 2. You're from the FCC?" "Yes, this is George Smith from the Office of the Federal Communications Commission. As I told your co-worker, I've been getting some disturbing calls about your morning radio show, and I need to speak to your program director to discuss it." He's not in yet. He'll be here at, 9 o'clock. "Okay, well, I can start with your station manager, since he will need to be in the conversation as well." The radio guy was breathing fast at this point, starting to lose all his composure. "Oh, wow, he gets in at 9 too. Can I have him call you?" He half asked and half pleaded. I let out what I hoped was a bureaucratic sounding sigh. "Very well, I will expect to hear from him at 9. I will need to speak to your station manager, your programming director, and very likely your on-air personnel from this morning. I'll also need your station logs." "Oh, yes sir, I'll make sure he calls you right away." "All right, well I'll be expecting his call. Here's my number." At this point, I gave the radio guy the second number I'd looked up in the phone book. The main number for the Office of the Federal Communications Commission. The radio guy stammered his thanks and promises of phone calls, and we hung up. I went back to the radio. The jerk disc jockey said, "Uh-oh, the FCC is calling. Well, they can't do anything to me. I've got a year of pre-law in college and blah, blah, blah." He continued his defiance for a few minutes and then went to commercial. I kept listening. They stopped talking about the prank call. They stopped taking phone calls from listeners. They stopped talking to the husband. They started playing music. A lot of music. I listened for the rest of the day. They didn't talk about it the rest of that day, and they didn't replay it at noon. In fact, for the rest of the week I listened and heard nothing about it. I was a bit surprised. I figured that they might stop talking about it for a little while, but not altogether. It wasn't until later that I realized why they went so silent. I had scared them. In my quest to get a little vengeance for that crying woman I'd never met, I scared them. But more to the point, I'd embarrassed them, and Jerk Disc Jockey had helped. Once he went live with his bravado against the call from the feds, their listeners knew they'd been called and heard the silence afterwards too. They were embarrassed because I'd just done to them what they'd done to her, and they didn't even want to admit it. Now, I've kept the name of this poor woman's husband a secret, because I've always wished that I could meet that woman, and her husband's name would be how I would know it was really her. I doubt she's still married to the guy, but I'd like to let her know that in that place, on that day, someone had her back. And there we go, that is the end of that story. I've got to say, that is hands down one of the best revenge stories I've read. First of all, amazingly well written and structured, I enjoyed that. But secondly, I cannot believe that radio stations in the past were allowed to do this. Look, I'm all for a good prank in good nature that people can laugh at, but when it's malicious like this, and you're really causing this woman to go through such a terrible moment in her life, I mean, yeah, genuinely floods of tears. She's probably thinking about the insane amount of debt that she's about to get into, and the fact that she'll have no power to her house. All for what? A couple of cheap malicious laughs on the radio? Why? That's insane. And also, her own husband has done this to her. Yeah, I agree with you, OP. I doubt that they're still together, and I very much hope that they're not still together. But wow, the fact that this sort of stuff used to exist is mental to me. Thank God that people like you exist, OP. People that are going to take things into their own hands and enact some sort of revenge like this. Ultimately, I don't know what happened to this woman, so we can't say if this revenge was successful or not, but at least this radio station got a little taste of their own medicine, embarrassing them, pranking them to a good extent. But wow, what a horrible thing to have done? I can't really believe that was allowed. Bad boyfriend takes the walk of ultimate shame. This happened about 16 years ago. My friend, let's call her Maria, had been dating a guy called Oscar for 2.5 years or so when she found out on the grapevine, if you live in a small town, you'll understand, that Oscar had betrayed her. He'd been to a party, got a girl drunk, and slept with her. News of his actions had spread as gossip does. The worst part of it was that it seemed that it wasn't the first time that had happened by a long shot. Well, Maria heard and plotted revenge. She invited him to her flat for a special afternoon of fun with her and her friend Vanessa. Oscar could not resist temptation, so he went. Picture the scene. He goes into the building where she lives, gets into the lift to go up to the 10th floor to get to her apartment. He rings the bell. He can hear music playing from behind the door. She opens the door and he walks in and sees that both his girlfriend Maria and her friend Vanessa are there, each wearing a sexy silk negligee. Maria is holding a blindfold and tells him to wear it. He agrees, and she puts it on him and tells him to strip naked. While he was busy, Vanessa put her clothes back on, walked out the apartment, leaving a doorstop to keep the door open, and called the lift. That's an elevator to you Americans. She then walked back in, grabbed Oscar's clothes, and threw them out the window into the car park below. She then left the apartment and went down the stairs, ringing doorbells as she descended. Meanwhile, Maria had been leading Oscar around the apartment, disorienting him, and then led him out the apartment, closed the door behind her, and got in the lift alone, calling him an unfaithful butthole whose clothes are in the car park before the lift doors closed. Oscar ripped off the blindfold and must have realized how screwed he was, as he had to walk down 10 flights of stairs, buck naked, passing laughing neighbors all the way. He collected his clothes, and Maria never saw him again. You see, revenge stories like this, I just absolutely love. Because imagine the high and then the low for this bloke. Like, that's so tough. He thinks he's about to have one of the best moments of his bloody life. Right, a cheeky threesome, 2 beautiful girls, his girlfriend, their mate, in sexy lingerie. Like, what is gonna go wrong here? Everything. Imagine walking downstairs through like an apartment block, everyone laughing at you. You've got your big old, well, probably small old chebber out, and that's about that. Does it get much worse? Like, the high to the low, incredible. What fall from grace? Hey, don't cheat on your girlfriend. Simple as that. Tried to throw me under the proverbial bus. Ran herself over. I was building an online training module at work that is intended to teach existing users how to work a new process. It has interactive elements, quizzes, segments to work through a few sample scenarios, etc. Now, we'd recently got a new associate director who, from what I can tell, advanced through the company by throwing other people under the bus. She gets promoted not for her own merits, but because at the end of the day, she's got less mud sticking to her than other applicants. It's uncanny to the point that there simply had to be more to it than stupid office politics. I'll get to that in a bit. So, after I have the first draft of the module done, it gets sent out for the usual round of testing. And there are of course a couple of things that need to be corrected. I build the module off the notes the subject matter experts leave me, and a few things inevitably get lost in translation. But this new associate director just rips it to shreds, complaining that it's completely incomprehensible, needs to go into much greater detail, asking questions about nearly every individual mouse click in the sample scenarios, and overall stating that it's impossible to follow. The thing is, this module is intended for our finance department, for people who have a background in finance and have already been trained on how to use our internal software. She is a training services associate director with a teaching background. The module isn't supposed to make sense to a former middle school social studies teacher. It's supposed to make sense to people with finance degrees. So I push back and I try explaining this to her in a million different ways, but she's having none of it. So I have to go back to the subject matter experts with her. 20 pages worth of criticism. And at first they think I'm joking. I had to forward her email before they finally believe me. So, for the next few weeks, we're going over every nuance, including readdressing everything that was covered during their 3-week classroom training. How to set up their network drives, how to set up Outlook, including things as nuanced as, if you don't know how to set up your email signature, click here. I mean, really basic stuff that has nothing to do with what the module was originally supposed to teach. But I now had to include it all because our new associate director couldn't find the on switch if you stapled her finger to it. This wastes my time, the subject matter expert's time, and time spent re-recording all the voice work. If you've done voice work in the past, you know you never get it in one take. Sorry, what? I get it in one take every time, I promise. Anyway, after it's all done, I send it back out for review and approval, and the associate director simply doesn't respond. A week passes. The finance director takes an interest in why this module is almost a month overdue. I go to forward the associate director's email again, except now I can't find it. This is odd, seeing as how I have a hoarding problem when it comes to email. I check with one of the subject matter experts I was working with, and he can't find it either. Turns out, none of us can find it. It's gone. So, I check with a friend of mine in IT, who, after a little detective work, discovers that a week ago, someone did a compliance delete on the Exchange server. This basically is a seek and destroy for messages meeting certain criteria. In this case, a specific phrase she used in her email. I start digging through Outlook, trying to find particular emails related to this that might be used to defend my actions, and they are all gone. Inbox, sent items, deleted items, every last one of them. Any email containing that particular phrase anywhere in it. This kind of thing is normally used by admins to mass delete spam or phishing emails from all users at once. Except in this case, someone apparently deleted emails that showed evidence of her awful decisions. My friend in IT can smell a juicy story a mile away and was very interested in seeing where this went. She recovered the deleted emails and I promptly saved them to a flash drive. For the next few days, every time I had any email with this associate director's name on it, even unrelated stuff, you never know how something might fit together, I saved a copy to the flash drive. I informed the subject matter experts to do the same, and we started building our offline evidence locker. I didn't want to blow the lid on it just yet. I wanted to see if my suspicions were correct. Maybe a lifetime of watching spy movies and cop dramas had corrupted my thinking. Maybe there was another explanation. Who knows? It could happen. I'm not God. I don't know everything. I'll play defense. So, after several weeks in total, trying to appease this associate director's unquenchable thirst for irrelevant details, and then getting ignored for a week, she finally publishes it and sends it to the finance director to approve so it can go live. Woo! Except the module, which was supposed to be a 30-minute online course, now contained 3 hours of content and went down several irrelevant rabbit holes that had been deemed critical supporting information. As an analogy, imagine designing a training module to teach a nurse how to enter some new CPT codes and being told you have to teach him how to read too, because he might not know what words are. That is how much BS was rammed into this thing. And the finance director, of course, hated it and was surprised that such a rambling mess of a module would come from me, of all people. So, he calls a meeting with me and the associate director on Tuesday to get some answers. And sure enough, she immediately tried to distance herself from it. She tried to paint it as her making a couple of suggestions and me clearly going way overboard. How I must have sent her a different version that she approved and switched them afterwards. That's not even possible, it would get thrown back into a draft status. She kept trying to talk over me as I voiced my defense, and to his credit, the finance director finally just muted her so I could speak. And boy did I. I explained everything. I shared my screen, popped in my flash drive, and opened my copies of the emails that had supposedly been deleted. Every email exchange where she complained about the material, I pushed back, and she flat out ordered me to build the module in the way I did. She abruptly left the meeting and went offline. The finance director asked me if I could send him a copy of all relevant files, and as I did so, I told him they might not be there later, and then explained what I'd learned about someone in IT using the compliance deletes. He assures me he'll look into it, and the poop immediately hit the fan. The associate director never logged back on. There was a massive internal audit where people from her previous departments were asked to provide statements. Leadership tried to keep it hush-hush, but you just can't keep something that big under wraps. I don't know the specific whats and hows, but the associate director and one of the IT managers had both left the company to pursue the next stage of their careers, and we sincerely wish them the best. I don't really do the social media thing, but over the next few days, as the rumor mill did what rumor mills do, I heard their poop absolutely blew up, and it came out that the associate director and that IT manager were having an affair. Now, this all went down about a month ago, but as I write this post, I thought to check online court records. Both are now facing divorces filed by their respective spouses. So yeah, there's a void in my direct leadership, in IT's leadership, and the entire IT department is getting a shakedown by information security to determine if there were any other leaks. I spent some time reflecting on why this whole series of events happened, and my best guess is she wanted to make a grand entrance by spearheading this masterwork training module that covered every possible scenario and contained any and all information anyone could possibly want. Then, as she started to realize how wasteful, rambling, and unnecessary it was, she realized that her grand entrance would be a grand faceplant. So instead, she tried to erase the evidence and pin all the nonsense on me to save face, but inadvertently set in motion the event that would expose her little arrangement with the IT manager, taking it up the butt in order to cover her butt, I guess. Guys, you know what's very embarrassing? Realizing that you've made a mistake, but not wanting to admit it, and actually instead trying to go back on it and pretend it never happened, deleting all those old files and emails, and who knows, maybe even doing something a little bit naughty with the IT guy in order to get what you want. I mean, who knows? OP doesn't say, right? There's no reason to suggest that this horrible woman didn't go into business with the IT guy to get what she wanted, if you know what I mean. I think it's pretty embarrassing though. Like, look, I get it. Trying to do well is one thing, and trying to impress people is a good thing, but not to the detriment of other people in that company. Like, how's that ever going to help in the long term? Everyone's just going to hate you. What's the point? And also, can you imagine watching a 3-hour training module telling you how to set up Outlook email? These are finance graduates, not idiots. Come on. And now moving on to our second story of prorevenge. You're replaceable? Okay, bye. I worked for a company for just under 5 years. The company I worked for existed for an additional 10 years prior to me. While I worked at this company, it ballooned to be the #1 provider in the region for its unique service, with about 75% of the market. It was a small business of about 15 employees. I loved my job, and the skills I learned while working there were quite valuable. I loved my team and the clients we provided services for. My twice yearly reviews with the owner were always 10 out of 10 with no recommendations for improvements. I was exceptional at my job in every way. I handled company operations, HR, payroll, customer service, marketing, employee management, schedules, employee and client training, and many other things at this company. I was also able to step in and do any of my teammates' jobs if they were out sick or on vacation. The owner of the company was giving out a bonus late summer last year, and mine, while being more than previous years, was notably less than my teammates. I asked the owner, are the bonuses related to performance? And if so, what could I have done to earn more? The owner replied, the bonuses are not performance related. You are just more replaceable than the others. A truly lovely thing to hear from your boss. Oh, okay, I replied, and I proceeded to process each of the bonuses, then went to lunch. I called my spouse to gain wisdom and advice. I was pretty lit, but I didn't want to make a rash decision. My spouse is very intelligent, and while they are not a fortune teller, they have an ability to foresee various responses and all the potential outcomes. They are business wise and have been on the executive team of a large company for the past 21 years, while also serving on several community boards and business advisory boards. We decided together to continue forward with our scheduled vacation and use the time away to calm our minds, relax, have fun, and to also determine the best course of action for me. We were leaving after working one more day, so I worked like all was normal the rest of the day, and the following day then left on vacation. While away, we discussed several scenarios, the potential outcomes, consulted with a business advisor and a business attorney. With all the advice I received, I determined that upon return from my vacation, I would resign from my role with a 2-week notice. However, in a fit of rage, I was immediately terminated by the owner, which was one of the scenarios we thought would happen, so I was prepared for that poor reaction. During the next couple of weeks, I created and opened a competing business offering similar services. However, I offered more customizable options with higher quality service and results. I knew our clients wanted these options and had proposed said options several times at my old workplace, but I was never greenlighted to implement the changes, for no reason other than the owner didn't come up with the idea, so it was a stupid idea. I also maintained communications with a few people from my old team. My old team did not relay the day-to-day happenings at my previous workplace, and I never asked about the company. However, they would vent to me on occasion. I would listen without comments. I knew service, quality, and the work environment in general suffered since my departure. Morale went down, and clients were less satisfied. I also read the Google and Facebook reviews for my old company. Yikes. Additionally, 2 full-time and 1 part-time persons were hired to fill my role, and a portion of my responsibilities, like HR and payroll, were filled by outside companies. I quickly built up my business, and within 3 months, I was able to hire several of my old teammates. They were able to jump in on day 1 with minimal training, as they were the best employees at my old workplace. The quality of the previous workplace's offerings continued to fall, which sent additional business my way and quickly caused incoming work to be non-existent at my old workplace. My old company went from being the #1 provider of unique service in the region to nothing in a matter of months. My previous employer is now searching for gainful employment. I know this because over the weekend, the owner applied for a position at my spouse's company. As a side note, I actually think my spouse's company should bring my previous employer in for an interview. But when they arrive, surprise, I'm the interviewer, and all I say is, how replaceable am I now? My spouse, rightfully so, has said no, but it would be fun, I'll give you that OP. So, moral of the story, don't tell your employees they are replaceable, because they might create a competing business that is better than yours while taking your best employees and your clients, who will leave you with no business to sell. The owner's whole retirement plan was to sell the business and start all over by searching for employment under someone else. Looks like your company was replaceable, not me. Now, if there's one thing that I would recommend to every business owner out there, every boss out there, do not tell your employees, oh, we don't really need you. You're replaceable. Don't ever do that. Please. What's actually the most embarrassing thing about this whole story is that this guy just did not realize the value that you were providing to the company. Forget even you going off and creating a rival business and decimating his. That actually doesn't really matter that much. The fact that they had to employ 2.5 plus some other people, some other freelance people to do your role, which was 1 person doing the role, obviously just you, is enough to say that you made a massive error. Like, come on. 3+ people doing the job of 1 person you let go or fired just because you couldn't give them a competitive bonus? That is so stupid. And I've seen it before in the subreddit. Idiotic companies like this one not prioritizing the people who make their company be so successful, and then it all turns to rubbish. And they're like, oh, I wonder why that happened. Maybe because you're an absolute idiot. I'm sorry, but this bloke just deserved absolutely everything he got there. And look, it's brilliant from OP to go and set up a rival business and be so successful, but that is like the icing on the cake. The truly idiotic stuff had already happened. I just don't get it. Wife cheated. Daughter supported the affair and disrespected me. Cut her off from my will and divorced her. Ex-wife is in mental hospital now. A fellow Redditor reached out to me and asked me to post this on this sub. I don't know if it's going to be of any help. It's been 13 days since I created this account to get it off my chest. I lost my dignity, my pride, my love. I'm a naked man who will be walking the walk of shame because of what I did. I disowned and destroyed my family. This is the only place I'll write this out. I don't intend for this to blow out, and if it does, I'll delete this account. I'm 48 now. This story started when I was 20. I met a girl who I thought was perfect. She was 19. We just clicked, had the perfect chemistry. We dated for 2 years before she got pregnant at 21, and we moved in together. I was living with my mum that time. My father died when I was 15, and mum never remarried. She had a consultancy firm where I worked as a receptionist. My late father's business was sold off, construction, as I was young. I became a father at 23 to a baby girl. She was the most beautiful girl. The bond between me and my girlfriend deepened after this. 2 years later, we got married. I then joined a job as a computer programmer and earned a 6-figure salary because it was in high demand. Our lives just took off. My wife wanted to be a stay-at-home mum. I agreed, but I also recommended her that she could take up a part-time job to spend her time. Now, things took a turn when I was 29 and she was 28. Her father had a terrible accident that made him immobile from the waist down. If it wasn't bad enough, he was the sole earner. I had a talk with my mum, and my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law moved in with us. They lived in a rented place, and now their sole earner was immobile, and finances were obviously then an issue. My sister-in-law took up a part-time job, as did my wife, to support her family. During this time, I also inherited from my late grandmother's will, which was split in two and was put for a college fund and my insurance by my mother. Now, I had no issues with it, but my wife wanted to buy a house with it so that we could move out from here. I had no problem, but she specifically wanted to buy a house in her mother's name with my inheritance, and both the sisters would then work to pay off my inheritance. This became the issue. So we had this distance between us because I found her proposal weird. Now 2 years passed by and my mother suffers a stroke as she had several clots and the doctors needed to do surgery urgently and fast. It was successful, but my wife wanted my mum to stay at hospital rather than come home because it would be difficult to have two patients at home at once. I told her I agree, but I'm gonna hire a nurse. She denied. She wanted me to hire 2 nurses to take care of my father-in-law and mum, or none. I told her that she's going to have to pay for her father's expense because I was already handling bills, groceries, taxes, our daughter's private school, and now this nurse. I'm not going to be able to pay for her father's nurse too. They should be able to afford it because both her sister and her make a combined of nearly 60k a year, which was probably more than enough given that they lived and ate for free. My relationship with our daughter soured a bit at this time. She began disrespecting me and was mean to me openly. I thought she was just having child issues. She was 8 at the time. My mother had a speedy recovery, and she voiced her opinions that she wants to sell her consultancy firm and put the money in my name. My wife had an argument right there and then, because she wanted her to give it to our daughter and my wife, as I'd already gotten my share of inheritance from my grandmother. What surprised me even more was that her mum and dad were quiet about it. My mum reminded her that it was her money, and that she doesn't mind giving her inheritance as insurance plans, but nope. My wife had problems with me, because you see, we don't have a joint account. She can't access my accounts, neither can I to hers. She wants a joint account. We had an argument and it was decided that my mum will give all the money to me, and that was the end of it. So a few months passed like this, but then unfortunately my father-in-law passes away. It was harsh, especially to my wife. Now I tried to console her every way I could. I handled both the household and the workload all by myself. I'm not bragging here, I just did. I tried to do everything I could, but it still wasn't enough for her. The funeral was my responsibility. It went well, but she'd still complain about how I could have done better. She began to sleep in a separate room with our daughter, who was 9 years old now. I convinced her to attend therapy and things settled down. We were intimate again. We reconnected in a better and stronger way, but I sensed then that something was off with our daughter. She would shut me down every time I wanted to talk to her. It hurt seeing her like this. 2 years passed by as I tried to build a better bond with our daughter. This time around, my mother passes away. She had another stroke and sadly couldn't survive. I was devastated by her loss. You see, she raised me all by herself for the majority of my life because my father was busy. It was also the reason I wanted our daughter to have a better relationship with both of us, and I was giving her a tremendous amount of effort to achieve that. I then went into depression, but no response from my wife. My daughter didn't even attend my mum's funeral, and I was saddened by that. 2 months after my mum's death, my mother-in-law asked me maybe I should move out from my own mother's house because I was overly depressed and I should get over it. I'm also ruining the atmosphere and it will lighten me up. I calmly told her, I want to remind you of your husband's passing. You and both of your daughters were in grief for 6 to 7 months. We never asked you to move out, and how dare you even ask me to move out from my own house? She was taken aback and went fully quiet. I talked to my wife regarding this, but she didn't even give me any response. I guess maybe 2 days later, this incident happened. I was grabbing something from the fridge and I noticed my daughter's phone. A text came that read something like, "It's good that the old witch is gone now. You can have the house to yourselves. We can have a party on your birthday." Excuse me, what? My daughter was 11 at the time, and what old witch? I read the convo, and yes, indeed, she was referring to my mother. She called me an ape, controlling, even though I never denied her anything except for things that I deemed were useless for her. She wanted a pony at 6, a koala at 9, a panda and her own car at 11. Like, who does that? I called my wife and showed her these. Her response was to be angry at me for trying to look at our daughter's phone. We had an argument about it before she stormed off. She again began to sleep in a separate bed. I tried to make amends, but she shut me down. It took me to agree to our daughter's birthday party to get her to talk to me. 3 years passed by. So for a quick review, my daughter is 15, I'm 38, and my wife is 37 at this point. I had to go to another city for a summit for 4 months. I landed up in another job that provided me with tons of opportunities and even better pay. Now, when I return, my wife's entire demeanor has changed around me. She quit her job, she'd hang out more with friends, which I supported, dressed up in more expensive and posh clothes. You get the idea. I thought it was a change of habit and I was fine with it. But our daughter openly disrespected me, was mean right to my face, and I just kept trying not to freak out. My mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and my wife were telling me it was just hormones and that she's just a kid. Now, I stayed upset, but yeah, I trusted them. Now, things in the bedroom skyrocketed at this time between me and my wife. She'd want me to go down on her. I loved that. Try out new positions, be kinky. I enjoyed every bit of it. Except for one day, she wanted to try the kink of me being caged, as in like chastity caged. I shut her down immediately. We argued over this for a week before she got frustrated and dropped the topic, and our sex life dwindled here. Things go worse from here. My wife suddenly wants to go on a girls' trip with her sister-in-law and our daughter. I had no issues, as it'll be great. I had to pay a nice sum for it, but it was okay. She didn't call me for 3 days. She had chats with her mum, but I only had a little bit of chit-chat with her. It was odd for me. I asked her about this when she returned, and she told me she was just tired. I asked to see her photos. I saw a lot of friends, both male and female, and it sent me into alert, but she assured me it was just her friends and a few male friends. I saw nothing suspicious, so I was okay. 2 months later was our daughter's birthday, and I wanted to plan something for her. My wife asked not to, as she would celebrate it with a girls' night. I was taken aback and voiced my opinion. Who the F takes their daughter to a girls' night? She told me it wasn't like that, but rather her friends and their daughters only, no alcohol involved, so I was fine with it. My birthday was around the corner after this event. Keep in mind, our sex life is bland now. It's once a week. I tried to initiate more, but she would always come up with excuses. I never celebrated my birthdays after my mum passed away, but each year my wife gives me a gift, so I kind of expected this. But on my birthday, my wife tells me she has to go shopping with our daughter. She goes out for 6 hours, no calls, no texts, and then no gifts. When I ask about it, she tells me one of her friends got into an accident and she stayed there and couldn't receive my calls. 2 weeks after this, my wife was showing me some pictures from our daughter's girls' camp, and our daughter called her saying that she needed her. So she handed me her phone and went out of the room. A text came telling our daughter, "Hey, my dear daughter, I'm sorry for this late reply. I'm the lucky one to be your mum's boyfriend. Tell your mum I love her and kiss her for me. I'll text you soon." It took me a whole freaking minute to read the text over and over again, and I still couldn't believe it myself. I scroll up to see my daughter had texted this person, "I'm glad you're mum's boyfriend. I really wish you were my dad. XO. What? I go to the toilet, lock the door, and read the whole conversation. All things noted, this guy is having an affair with my wife, and our daughter knows. This guy is having an affair, and our daughter knows. What in the frickin' world? I saw pictures of vacations, girls' trips, our daughter's birthday. They frickin' went to a candlelit dinner as a family. This guy was kissing my wife right in front of our daughter, and my daughter was pointing at them like it was some sort of a good romantic thing. What's more, my sister-in-law frickin' knew. The more I scrolled, the more my heart sank. It was this guy who gave my wife the idea about chastity. It seemed to me that my daughter and wife were both texting about this. What's more, this account wasn't even her real. It was a different username, but this guy knew everything about my family. Even on my birthday, my wife and daughter were with this guy at his house. What the F? He was then over at my house, sleeping on my bed while I was gone for 4 months. And even worse, it has been going on for 4 years. 4 freaking years. I heard a loud bang on the toilet door. It was our daughter. I just came out and stared at her. This was the first time I'd ever stared at my daughter like this. The same daughter that I looked at with pride, love, and respect just sank to indifference and disappointment. I wasn't even angry. She was red and crying. She didn't know what to say. My wife was there, as was my sister-in-law and mother-in-law. I just asked my mother-in-law if she knew what her daughter did. My wife responded, "We can talk." I don't know what came over me. I yelled out, "Just shut the F up or I'll strangle you right now." So loud that even our neighbors might have woken up. I questioned my mother-in-law again and she nodded. She freaking nodded. I looked at my daughter and I told her I'm sorry I couldn't be a better father, but I'll do this one thing for her and divorce her mother. I called my wife her mother for the first time while addressing her, so that this guy can be her father whom she so clearly and dearly wants. I looked at my wife and told her she has 9 days, month's end, to pack up and leave with her family. I'll hand over the divorce papers, but for now, move out. She kept crying, but my yelling and response might have taken her off guard. She knew I wasn't in a mood to argue or talk. I gave up. It's over. That was that. I couldn't sleep the whole night. I just stared at the wall and my phone, looking at our family photos. In the morning, I tell my wife not to cook for me because I don't trust her. She might poison me. Not gonna lie, she broke down and I felt I was out of line with this, and I was going to file for divorce today. She tried to talk, but I had none of it. My mother-in-law asked me to wait and listen to her before making my decision. I had a friend who's a lawyer. I meet him and lay all my cards on the table. He just tells me this: I've been a lawyer for 12 years, he's 41, and I haven't seen a case as infuriating and saddening as yours. He hugged me. He told me his uncle is the family judge who probably will be handling my case. But before that, I need proof, and loads of it. He gave me a number of someone who happens to be a PI, and I hired him. He went through my daughter's phone. Nothing. Talked to my wife. She told me sorry over and over again, but no remorse. My daughter, sister-in-law, and mother-in-law didn't come anywhere near me. My daughter even went to the point of being afraid of me so much that she lived for 2 days at her friend's house. Her friend's father called me and I had to inform him of the entire situation. He said he's sorry. It was hard for him to believe what my daughter did, as it should be. No man could ever dream of being betrayed like this by their own children. The PI found the guy, and it turns out he's an idiot. A coward from the countryside who fears commitment, is a small-time thief, and used to work at the same place as my wife. I hit his place with my lawyer, PI, and another of my friends, who happens to be police. We got him cornered on falsified claims, and he spilt the beans. It turns out that he was attracted towards my wife and accepted a challenge from his co-worker that he'll have her in his bed. It soon turned to love. He was actually in love with my wife. It turns out it was him who had called me my mum's witch. It was a separate caller ID, and he was just friends with my daughter before my wife dropped the news that she was having an affair with this guy. He was even ready to provide a written statement, video of him confessing, any photos, and even a witness for exchange of promise that word of this won't reach his office or his sickly mum, who is 60 plus with a heart disease in the countryside, and a few $1,000. I agreed. My wife moved out with her family. She took a few more thousand from me to pay lease. Divorce hearing. I lay all my cards on the table. All the screenshots, every video of her boyfriend confessing, all the lies, receipts, and even photos of them holding hands and kissing. The look on her face soured. She told me that I was abusive, but this claim was easily dismissed as there was no proof, and if I was abusive, why would I allow her to do a job and keep her family at my house? She had nothing to prove, and even her lawyers were taken aback by the amount of proof that we had. She conceded at the end and told me she's incredibly sorry for what she did, and that she'll do anything to make up for it, even if it needed the rest of her life to do so. The judge said that I'll have to pay spousal support to her for 4 years. There was no custody battle, as our daughter was already 17 at the time. She, of course, wished to stay with her mother. I had no problem with that. I'll come to this later. and my wife would receive half of my house and her car, but nothing except that. I offered to buy her share of the house. I got a hefty sum left by my mother, remember? Another reason was the house market would go up in future, and I'll make a profit from that. Now here I requested one thing from the judge. I wanted to have my name removed from my daughter's birth certificate. This, of course, was not possible. Then, if I couldn't, I would disown our daughter. The look on my wife's face was just the best thing. Her face turned white. She responded, "How could you?" I reminded her that she put me through this. My daughter yelled, "Dad, you can't do this," right in the courtroom, but I ignored her. The judge was a good man and understood my sentiments. However, he advised me to forgive. There's no way I can disown her legally, but I can cut her off from my will. That was that. It took me 8 months to get the divorce finalized, and I couldn't be happier. When I got out, I hugged my lawyer. He saved me. My ex-wife and my ex-daughter came up. My wife told me she knows she doesn't even have the face to ask for forgiveness, but if I can find it in my heart, please forgive her. I replied, "I don't have a heart." She ripped it out. My daughter said she's sorry for what she did. She will be the best daughter and ask for another chance. This girl had the audacity to call me dad. I reminded her I wasn't her dad. I'm an ape, if she remembers, and that her dad is the one that she actually wanted. She should be happy that her mother is single now. She chased me, but I left. On our way back, I asked my lawyer if I could let the company my ex-wife works at know what my ex-wife has been up to these years. He advised me to get an RO first. With the help of my police friend and judge, I was able to get one, I had to spend money, that went nuclear. Made 5 copies of evidence. One for the company, one to be sent to my ex-wife's boyfriend's sickly mum. I don't care, he didn't respect my home and my mum, I can't respect his. One with my lawyer, and I burnt one. The last copy I left in my locker. The fallout was quite the show. They were fired. My ex-sister-in-law had the guts to call me out. She told me that she'd known me as a brave, upstanding, loyal, strong character and a humble man, but she never thought I'd ruin her sister's career like this. She yelled at me for getting her sister fired. I chuckled and reminded her that it was her who supported the affair. Now yes, I might be a coward for doing this, but what did that make her as a homewrecker? I asked her why she was so mad. Is there a possibility that she spread her legs for her sister's boyfriend too? She was sickened and blocked me. My mother-in-law reached out. Now I've forgotten about this woman, and she apologized for what happened. She couldn't raise her daughters well, but I called her out. I told her she was a horrible and greedy woman. I wouldn't give a darn if she dies, and that she should be thankful for having a person like me as her son-in-law in this life, before blocking her. As for the boyfriend, his mother had a heart attack and passed away. It turns out his mother always hated infidelity because her son had daddy issues. Their dad left him before he was born. I felt sad, but therapy made me realize that I shouldn't. It's human nature. I didn't know any of this before. He nuked my marriage and family, and I replied the favor. As for my daughter, she kept reaching out, apologizing for every word. I blocked her, but she won't stop reaching out to me. I had to change my number. I sold my house 8 months after the divorce was finalized and got a hefty sum. I moved to a different city. I started afresh. I attended therapy, the gym, I got a better paying job. I got into boxing. I bought a house, invested in cryptos and stocks, made a fortune, got into the dating market when I turned 42, met and remarried again at 44. Now I've got a better wife who is amazing in every way. She knows the value of relationships because she herself faced the same situation as me. No kids though. Now I've got a 4-year-old son with her and I couldn't be any happier. I executed my will that excluded my daughter, so she won't be getting anything from me. I don't know how, but my daughter was able to reach out to me just 2 weeks ago. She sent 8 long paragraphs detailing how sorry she is. She's been in crippling depression, therapy, working hard. I got a call then from my lawyer, which surprised me even more. My daughter turned up to the lawyer's office with $20,000. I don't know where she got this from, making a request that she'll work hard and return every last penny I spent on her. She'll keep apologizing for the rest of her life, but she wants me in it. She can't stay like this anymore. It's eating her alive. I don't know much about what happened, but as I heard, her mother, my ex-wife, turned depressive and had to be admitted into a mental hospital. Her sister moved in with an alcoholic abuser and is pregnant with her second kid. My ex-mother-in-law passed away. She had an accident, lost a lot of blood, and if she survived, would have ended up like her late husband. So now my ex-daughter is living alone, working at a part-time job because she couldn't finish her education. She borrowed some money from friends. I also heard nearly all of her friends cut her off after I had a talk with her friend's dad. Everyone called her toxic and moved on. I'm not gonna lie, hearing all of this shattered my heart. My wife is pushing me to build a bridge with my ex-daughter, saying that she clearly now realizes her mistakes and she needs me now more than ever. If I don't help her now, she won't get up and will keep on falling endlessly. I don't know how to feel. When you're a father, a lot of responsibilities lie on your shoulders that you can't simply outrun. I gave my daughter the world and she stabbed me. I was hurt and angry, but more, my pride was shattered. My love was shattered. My decision to cut off my daughter was the toughest one, but I still made that decision. I don't know if I should contact my ex-daughter now. My lawyer has said that I should because it's the right thing to do. I need to let it go for myself. It's funny how life can change in an instant. Now, honestly, guys, I don't even know where to begin with this story. Such a sad tale. So much happened over such a long period of time. I don't really think it's worth going back and rehashing all of it. So I think instead, we'll jump to the here and now. Guys, comment down below, what should OP do about his daughter? Now, look, obviously loads has happened, and I don't think it's worth OP going back through all of it and, you know, trying to think about everything that's gone on and make decisions based on that. Ultimately, it's time for him now to make a decision on his future and whether or not that includes his daughter. Guys, first of all, do get your comments in. I want to hear what you think. Should OP take his daughter back, have her back in his life or not? It's an interesting one. Me personally, I think he should. I think there's a very high chance that from a very early age, clearly, she was coerced into just hating her dad. Now look, that doesn't excuse the things that she did. Ultimately, she knew about her own mum cheating on her dad for 4 years. Yeah, it's pretty shameful. But then if you look at it from the other perspective, her mum was almost definitely, and probably her mum's boyfriend too, was saying, don't say, your dad's a horrible person, you know, making her not want to talk to him and be so rude to him. There's no reason why a normal daughter would just be rude to their dad. It seemed like they got on well before all this happened, right? So it must have come from somewhere. And I think it's very likely that the mum was heavily involved in trying to persuade and push that kind of point of view onto her own daughter. Maybe even in many ways justifying her own affair because, oh, my daughter hates this guy too. Fine, let's continue this affair with a new guy who my daughter likes. I think at such an early age, it's probably likely that, yeah, she wasn't thinking for herself. And now it's so clear that she feels so bad about how she acted, what's happened, etc., etc. And I genuinely do think that she is remorseful and wants to have you back in her life for no reason other than just she feels bad. I don't think it's for any sort of other reason, some malicious reason apart from that. I mean, the fact that she's even willing to pay you back all the money that you spent on her in her childhood suggests that to me. It's not for a financial reason. Look, obviously it's hard to know without being OP himself, but in this situation, I don't know. I think I'd lean towards giving the daughter a chance, given that she was probably manipulated for so long and was very young while this was all going on and is clearly very remorseful now. But hey, guys, comment down below. Do you agree or disagree with me? It's one of those, isn't it? It's very contentious. So much happened, so much stuff that, you know, OP will never probably recover from despite therapy. Does he want to go back to a little bit of that life? I don't know. But it is his daughter after all. Let me know. What do you think? An interesting one. And there we go. Wow. Save the best till last, if I do say so myself. That final story was just unbelievable. I really do hope you enjoyed this extended episode of r/prorevenge. And if you somehow, even after all of that, want even more from me, I've chucked a few other revenge movies up on screen, and they're also down below in the description. With that all being said, leave a like on the video, you beautiful people. And I'll see you all tomorrow with a brand new one.